All right, everybody. Sorry for that abrupt stop. I kind of have to do it. There's some big glitch in my system. I really am going to send a message to this streaming system and ask them if they can have something that eases in. I would prefer that. But we are here today. It is Gen X News, and I've got a rather gothic episode for you today. If you don't know anything about me, I'm a Gen Xer. I'm pretty sure my guest is a Gen Xer, and he does filmmaking. He has a history. His father worked for Hammer Studios. I've had Gary on before. Gary Parson is here, and we're talking about the Highgate Vampire. And if you know anything about a lot of Gen Xers, we had a gothic streak to us, and I certainly did as well. of course, when the Highgate Vampire happened, which was like late 60s, early 70s, I didn't even exist. So I'm going to get a history lesson here from Gary Parsons along with you guys when we bring him in. Just before I bring Gary on and we start talking about this really fascinating topic and media frenzy, I'm going to ask you guys if you would please subscribe to whatever platform you're listening on. If you just go to the website, genxonx.com. All the links are there. Of course, we are streaming live on X, Rumble, and YouTube right now. It is also available in audio podcast form. If you just go to the website, genxonx.com, all of the links are there, and you can find us either live streaming, which I encourage you to do because then you can ask guests like Gary questions or interact with the information. Also, I'm on Substack at genxonx.substack.com. You can check out there. I also have subscribers. I have 2 subscribers. I'm putting out content. I just put out an e-zine for my subscribers on X. I'm going to be putting out more e-zines. I'll design them. Also, exclusive streams just for subscribers and daily posts, anything like that. So, Gen X News on X is me at X, and you can become a subscriber and get my cool stuff. I'm going to be designing more stuff for people who support me every month, and I really appreciate it. So, Gen X News on X. See you under the subscriber tab, guys. Okay, so who do we got coming? All right, we got Jonocide in the room. Thank you, Jonocide. Jonocide says, I read the Highgate Vampire book. I forget the author, but I think he was the one who investigated it. Well, let's not leave this off for too long. We're going to have Gary come in, and he's going to tell us everything about it. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Hi. Good to be with
All
you.
right, okay. Gary,
It's night time here, so
you're in the right mood. I'm making it look like ambience nighttime here. I'm faking it. Okay, so I mean, you've been on my show before. We've talked about you have a history in film, and your
yeah,
father worked at Hammer Horror and stuff like
that's
that.
right. Yeah.
But what drew you to do this lecture and research on the Highgate Vampire?
Because it was coming up in sort of, how can I put it? I was talking about films, horror films, etc., and various like occult things as well, and it kept coming up because of the era I was dealing with, and I was mainly dealing with stuff from the late '60s and early '70s, and it was a recurring theme in a couple of my talks that I brought up, and I thought, oh, this is happening around about the same time as the Highgate Vampire thing was happening in London, etc., etc., etc. And one of the people at the venue I was talking to said, it would be great if you did a talk on the Highgate Vampire. So I had to sort of go and remind myself exactly all the bits and pieces for it, because to be fair with you, it's a very kind of convoluted long story. It's not as
Mm-hmm.
simple as it might appear. And one of the things about it is a fact of it starts off very small and then gets blown out of all proportion. And but it's also very much of the zeitgeist of the time of what was happening at the time, and especially in the UK at the time. So I mean, we're looking, 2 years after the like kind of hippie explosion, etc., etc. And
Mm-hmm.
again, you got to remember that in '67, the Beatles had Crowley on the front cover of the Sergeant Pepper's album, all this kind of thing. It's Eastern mysticism came in, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And there was a revival of interest in all things to do with witchcraft, the occult,
Yep.
esoterics,
And
and
and you get
because
movies like Rosemary Baby,
yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
There was a sort of resurgence of all these kind of things that was being sort of happening, and especially in the UK at the time. There was again, I do a talk on witchcraft documentaries. I'm the guy who kind of did all the research on all these kind of things that were happening at that period of time, and it's we had magazines in England called Witchcraft Magazine. Okay, these you could buy in your local news. We got the news agent here is W.H. Smith's. You could buy it in. I don't know what the equivalent would be in the state.
Right? I'm familiar with that store.
Yeah, it's basically it was a kind of a top shelf magazine. So because it would have stories about witchcraft, etc., etc., including pictures of naked ladies, witches dancing around, whatever else. But it was a magazine that was bought every month. Now you wouldn't get that
Mm.
kind of magazine today or any other time. because it's very
Right.
much of a period of time because of people, that resurgence of interest. And that's how come you notice within like the horror film genre, like within Hammer horror, they begin
Mhm.
to shift away. And this is an interesting thing that I'll mention a bit to do with the Highgate Vampire and Hammer horror. They shift away slightly from the kind of fairly staid horror films they were making, even though they were extreme at one point, they were getting a bit whatever, but then embracing this new Aquarian age kind of attitude
Right, and
within their
you
horror.
see Dracula kinda shifting from, like, this Christian context to sorta like disco Dracula and corporate Dracula
Well,
or something weird,
yeah,
different.
yeah.
It
I mean,
changes and there's a lot more nudity.
yeah, well, that's one big point to it. The other thing about it is the fact of what they start to bring in within the Dracula genre is black magic. And
Right,
if you look within about the last two or three films that Hammer made, Dracula films that Hammer made with Christopher Lee, basically it has black magic, satanic, if you want to call it satanic. Not satanic, but like black magic elements within them. Okay, and this starts with Taste the Blood of Dracula and goes right the way through to the Satanic Rites of Dracula, which is the final film.
literally.
Yeah. So, but again, these things also have a bleeding context to the and actually take influence from the Highgate Vampire. So, so you're looking at this kind of almost cross pollination of ideas where popular culture suddenly bleeds into something that is which starts out as basically an esoteric investigation and then blows up into a media frenzy kind of thing.
Right.
um what like, I don't know if you've ever been to Highgate Cemetery.
I
um
haven't. I've seen pictures. I've been to
okay,
London, but I never
it's
got to go.
it's massive. Okay. And
Mhm.
at the time, I mean, I think I had a note here written down about how many bodies were buried there. It was like I mean, it, it was there's thousands of people buried there. So also
Yeah.
170,000 bodies have been buried.
Whoa, that's a
Like,
city.
yeah,
That's a small city.
yeah, and basically because it was opened in 1839. By the time of the 1960s, it had actually gone into disrepair. So whereas
Right,
now you have to pay to get into certain bits of it, it's all very closed off and everything. But from the 60s until like the early 80s, it was pretty much a free for all. You could stroll around in there. There were you know graves that are beginning to sort of slowly get dilapidated and everything like that. And so it was kind of, it had gates, but they weren't very effective. Let's put it that way. People were
mhm,
getting in
mhm.
there at all times of day and night. And
I'll show you guys some pictures of it.
yeah, well, that's actually from a photo, a posed for photo shoot. The guy who's in it is a bloke called David Farrant. Now, David Farrant actually is the guy who starts this entire investigation off,
He's
because we're talking
They're
about
so
two men.
cute together.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of done. Actually, they were meant to be making a film, strangely enough, about the Highgate Vampire,
Mm,
but that film never happened. And these shots were kind of from that. Yeah, this is basically a part of it where you can get into lots and lots of different graves. I mean, you can go in and see like the bodies all stacked up. Even today, you can still see all this in there. So
wow, I wanna go.
this is called the Columbarium, and
Right.
you can still see it, that today. Um,
Mhm,
and it basically, when you go in there, it's got a massive Egyptian gate thing with sphinxes in that you go. It's just one bit of it.
mhm.
Okay, it's a massive cemetery. I mean, what's her name? Is it the Rossetti woman is buried there and all that kind of thing? I mean, there's lots of people that passed away, and there was already
Right.
tales of sort of
Spooks.
gothic mischief going on there, for want of a
Mhm,
better word.
mhm. So,
But
what okay, so for people who don't know, who are tuning in, we're kind of talking about people involved, but what actually is it? Is the Highgate, like, what was the claims? What's the basis, the crux of this whole phenomena? Like, where does it start and what is it?
I mean, how do you mean, what, the vampire story, or
Yeah, like the Highgate Vampire. Is it just people claiming there's a vampire? Like
or
what is the specific claim?
no, the vampire actually comes a little bit later. It
Okay, so
starts
it
off.
starts before that.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It starts off basically with um, Farrant, the guy you just seen. But
Mhm.
he witnesses something um, there, or he gets, basically he runs like a psychic occult society at the time, and
Right.
people sort of contact him and tell him, what things that happened to them, whatever else. Anyway, there's actually an accountant that writes to him and says that he's gone past the cemetery late one night and he's seen something, this being with red eyes, etc., etc., through the gates. Like, it's made him very nervous and whatever else. Anyway, basically, we know by this point that the cemetery is actually being used by various occult black magic organizations. Okay, because
Mhm.
there's lots and lots of grave desecrations. I mean, this is '69. This is the same year that there's a Italian director makes a film called Witchcraft 70. It's not in the American version of Witchcraft 70, unfortunately. It's in the European cut, which is called Angeli Bianco, Angeli Nero, Angel of Light, Angel of Dark, kind of thing. And the opening scene of this film is actually the grave desecrations at Highgate Cemetery. So if you've got
Okay.
an American print of this film, you're not going to see this bit. Um,
Right.
and it shows, again, black magic symbolism, etc., etc. And this was done around about the same time that Farrant was first investigating it. So basically, he goes there, he finds dead foxes, and I mean, dead foxes are not unusual to find, but he finds them
Mhm.
in various positions, etc. And and he basically, while he's there, he does his overnight vigils with his group, and again he sees a figure, okay, a figure, sort of a black outline, and he sort of thinks, okay, there's something going on here. But first of all, he thinks, to be fair with you, that it's an occult organization that are going in there and doing grave desecrations and whatever else, because there's things like skulls removed from graves and whatever else, all these
Mhm.
kind of things that are happening, because basically the whole cemetery is almost like a bit like the Wild West. It's a free for all in there. So people are breaking in and using the graveyard as some sort of, for what we term black magic ritual purposes. Okay.
Right.
Um, so yeah, they he doesn't want to hold seances there because he feels that, all that's going to do is help the residual energies of the place. But then what he does do, he writes to the local newspaper, which is the Hampstead and Highgate Express, and basically saying, "Is has anyone else here seen anything?" There you go. And again,
Yeah.
it's the thing with the foxes dying. Yeah. So basically, he asks whether anyone's actually seen anything there, and he gets actually what is quite astonishing amount of replies, and these are all published in that newspaper. So, and again, most of them are sort of saying similar things. They've seen a figure with red eyes, etc., etc., or they felt something strange there, and so he claims at this time, okay, and I think this is probably the true fact, but we'll get onto this later on, that without doubt the satanic masses are being taking place there, and the tombs have been converted, and some of the tombs have been converted into a small temple. So there's a photograph some which I actually used in my talk, that he
Mhm.
took of one of the a converted tomb, a temple in the middle of a tomb, like a ritual space using bones, etc.,
Yeah,
etc.,
that's
etc.
them trying to scale.
This is from the paper. This is when that's when it all broke. So we'll get to that in a second.
I
So
see again.
yeah. he's you know, basically he thinks that that this is the case. At this point, when he makes his claim about this, he then starts getting threatening letters from an occult organization, and these are signed in blood and covered with like occult symbols, etc. And and basically saying that that they mention various occult things. One of them including the name of the deity Hadit, which is a Thelemic deity. So I'm not really quite sure about that because Thelema wouldn't have anything to particularly do with um,
Hmm.
uh, black magic rituals, as uh, in the cemetery. But there we go. There's a
Right.
whole game altogether. We're at a point now where lots of these books are finally being released for the first time, so people are kind of a bit of everywhere with it. So yeah, he basically investigates this as basically being a satanic ritual that's happening. This all changes when a guy called Sean Manchester, now known as the Reverend Sean Manchester, but I won't refer to him as that
Oh.
because he's not. In my opinion, he's just Sean
That's what
Manchester.
he calls himself now? He's
Well, I
still
think
alive?
I'm not sure if he kind of got ordained. I don't really know, to be honest with you. He's, you know, um, yeah, he's a bit of a strange, odd person. So,
Eccentric?
to say the least, yeah. And as you'll find out, and basically, he begins to sort of get involved with it as well. Again, claiming that people have come forward to him, um, and saying that they're having experiences close to or round about the area of Highgate Cemetery. So he meets with a number of witnesses. There's an accountant and two 16-year-old schoolgirls who witnessed ghostly apparitions and rising from the grave and things while they're sort of cutting through the cemetery, because again, it's open, it's a free for all. So they're coming home from school and using the cemeteries as a shortcut, which is a something I did when I was young. On my way home from school, I
You
used to,
know, I
used
lived, when the town I was born in, St. John, New Brunswick in Canada, I used to have to walk through a cemetery to go downtown. It was a park slash cemetery, so I get
hmm.
it.
And so yeah, um, basically one of these schoolgirls then begins to claim that she's being visited by an entity at night time as well. So she's talking about they're in contact with Manchester, and she's sort of saying that this is happening, and this entity comes through her bedroom window. Okay, and basically, he then feels that this is sort of something a bit more than just um, satanic rituals and stuff like that. Um, and a couple of years later, he bumps into the girl again, and she still claims that this is happening to her. And again, he notices this is classic. I mean, this entity comes through the window. I think doesn't Bela Lugosi do that in the Universal Vampire? Doesn't Christopher Lee do that in the
Mhm.
first Dracula
Hmm.
as well? But anyway, that's by the by. Um, I'll leave you to make your own mind up about these things. And basically, he discovers then, because she's lost weight and all this kind of thing and whatever else, and her boyfriend's very very worried about her. Um, that she has two puncture marks on her neck, and there's a photograph that he took. So we're talking about he took at the time of
Mhm.
this girl with the two puncture wounds on her neck.
And let
So
me guess, it looks just like the kind of unrealistic puncture wounds from the movie?
oh, yeah, 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 yeah. It's just basically
That's
two
not
dots.
biologically accurate?
Yeah, just like two dots on
Someone
her
bit
neck.
your neck?
Yeah. And basically he thinks Manchester assumes that the apparition or the vampire comes from what the columbarium, which is the bit you just showed just then, the
Mhm.
rounded bit. He's convinced that 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 it comes from there because this girl's living very close to Highgate Cemetery. So and he's convincing that basically this vampiric apparition comes and visits her. I mean, why her out of everyone, particularly, we don't know, etc., etc., and why he would travel outside of the cemetery again, we don't know. This is all kind of speculation. So, so basically, um, he then tells her boyfriend then to sort of make sure that she, puts garlic around her neck and basically. You've seen horror movies, yeah? You've seen
Yes.
vampire movies, and
Mhm.
this is what he's basically telling
Many of
her to
them.
do as a protection kind of thing, garlic,
Right.
crucifixes, that kind of thing. So yeah, and because she's so ill, um, and he diagnoses her with suffering from vampirism. Okay, because obviously he's a doctor as well, as we know. But yeah, so as him being a
He's
psychic,
Van Helsing.
yeah, yeah, and that's basically really the whole point of this is whereas Farron tends to be the more, how can I put it, uh, thoughtful investigator.
Mhm.
Manchester basically sets himself up as being Van Helsing, okay, throughout this
Right.
entire.
Like, he's more fantastical and into the fantasy part.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
he
yeah.
doesn't realize it, but he is.
Hmm. He's basically he just thinks this is it. I found this, and this is the entranceway to the Columbarium, by the way. So you go in there,
Beautiful.
and that bit you've seen, which is the rounded bit,
Mhm.
that's the gate where you enter
So you
into.
go in there and then you end
You
up
see it quite well.
in here.
There's two films it's shown in. One is an Amicus movie, and I can't remember the name off the top of
Oh,
my
I've
head.
seen some of those Amicus ones
Yeah,
on
yeah, and I can't remember the name
YouTube.
off the top of my head. It starts off with that.
Right.
Um,
I'll have to check it out and see.
and the other one is Taste the Blood of Dracula, which you see
Oh,
one of the few
okay. Yeah,
times
yeah,
that,
yeah.
Hammer went and filmed on a location somewhere outside of Elstree Studios at that point.
Right.
So,
So we got
but
Van Helsing in action here, like we were
yeah, yeah, yeah.
saying.
So yeah, he basically he thinks that she's suffering from vampirism, and and this is it. At this point, there is a thing because Manchester often talks about the boyfriend with this woman called Elizabeth, who is the woman suffering from vampirism. But there is a theory actually that the boyfriend doesn't exist, and actually Manchester is the boyfriend. So
Oh,
this all. I mean, there's so many conspiracy theories where, we could again be here all night. So about this, um, but because of this, and because of the publicity that the
right.
newspaper has, um, we get a word of mouth spread about events at the cemetery, and people begin
Mhm.
to go there after dark. Normally fueled by booze and and basically wanting to spot a vampire or two. So um, on the 25th of February 1970, Manchester gives an interview claiming that it is a vampire that haunts the cemetery. So, and apparently, it's a nobleman from Turkey. That's his followers. His followers have bought him. I mean, you couldn't, Bram Stoker couldn't have made this crap up. Um, his followers bought him to the UK and in the 18th century, and basically, and he was buried there, and then he got resurrected, and he's been resurrected by Satanists. So he's been resurrected fairly recently. So that kind of bleeds in a bit with the Farrant
So,
story.
did you say recently? Like, or recently then, or
Recently,
recently
then,
now?
yeah, in
Recently
the
then,
60s, yeah,
in the
he'd been,
60s.
yeah, so, someone had
Okay.
decided that they're going to sort of resurrect him via satanic rituals
They
because,
have definitely been watching some Dracula films.
mm, mm,
Oh my god, that's a plot
absolutely,
line, like, right out of a Christopher Lee film.
yeah, yeah. To be fair, but the thing is, what happens is here we must remember that the the first incidents of Dracula being conjured up from by someone using a satanic ritual actually
Mhm.
happens. The filming is done during the whole publicity thing for the Highgate Vampire.
So basically, Dracula influences them, they get in the media, and they start influencing the filmmakers.
Yeah,
It's like,
absolutely. Yeah.
"Oh, wow. Yeah,
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 yeah, I
yeah, yeah.
gotcha."
That's what happens. That's how come in Taste of Blood, Dracula, as I said, you see there's a sequence where they go to the satanic ritual in this church, sort of thing, and they actually they enter in via the Highgate Cemetery, so they go into the columbarium in Highgate Cemetery, so you can see that in that movie. Um, so yeah, so that it's so yeah, you've then got real life things bleeding into a cultural thing when it starts off coming from a cultural thing in the first place. So uh, he
Paul from
feels.
Newcastle.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah, one of your fellow citizens in from England is
yeah.
here. Awesome.
Oh, someone from the UK. Hi. Well, hopefully
Yeah,
they should
Paul
know
is
what I'm talking about,
Paul, when he says Paul from Newcastle, he's really from Newcastle.
and know some of my English colloquialisms as well, which is probably
Excellent.
But
Anyways, where were we?
yeah, basically Manchester then decides that he sets himself up as being the guy that's gonna dispose of the vampire, and guess the way he's gonna do that. Hardly it hardly takes much guessing. He's going to use obviously garlic. He's going to use a stake through the heart and decapitation, of course.
Where's the
All
holy
these.
water?
Oh, there's going to be, yeah. There's a bit of that as well. Yeah, basically it's if you'd basically been to the cinema for about the last 10 years in the 1960s and seen a Hammer horror film or an Amicus or Tygon movie, you would have seen all this stuff. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, basically that's where it's all coming
Right.
from. Um, and what happens is um, this then starts beginning to bleed into the fact that the TV starting to want to cover it. Okay, and because suddenly we got a cultural phenomenon, we got things that are happening that people are coming forward and saying they're seeing this and seeing that, and that's coming into like local newspaper, and it then starts making its way from obviously local newspapers into more mainstream newspapers, and finally into a news item as well. Um, Manchester and Farrant sort of start kind of almost working along side by side with each other. It's an unholy alliance in a weird way.
What?
Um,
I think I may have that. There's one picture in there. Mm, no, that's him and the girl. That's maybe not. No, I
yeah,
did flash up a picture with two people in it, and I think it's that express thing. Is that both of them there in the picture on that news article?
yeah, 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 yeah.
The one on the
But
left is
the one the right pointing is Farrant, and the other one is
that's
Manchester.
Farron. That's
Yeah,
and Manchester's the one who's prone to flights of
yeah,
fancies, so to say.
yeah. Well, basically, what happens is there's in the UK we have areas of what we kind of still have it today. Areas where like we have this independent television thing called ITV, okay, but it'll
Yeah.
be like you'd have different programs for the north of the country than you would do for the south of the
Right. The
country, and you probably have
regional.
that in the states. Yeah, regional
Yeah.
programming.
Yeah.
And basically, it goes out as a news item um, in the London area, on ITV in the London area, that where this news item interviews Manchester, and Manchester saying there's a vampire here, and kind of Farrant just goes along with it because I think he thinks it's a bit of a hokum, and also trying to explain to people that there's devil worshippers in the cemetery doesn't isn't. I don't know. It becomes a bit more complicated. I also think he thinks that it'll go away. If someone says something as ludicrous as it there being a vampire in Highgate Cemetery, people laugh at it and it will go away, and he can get
Mhm.
on investigating. The absolute opposite happens. The program is aired on Friday the 13th, strangely enough, of March in 1970, and at 6 p.m. By 8 p.m. that evening, in one of the entranceways to the cemetery, if you see your photo you put up a little bit earlier on, there's people literally climbing over the gate to wanting to be Van Helsings.
Oh, and there
There's a
is, where was that photo I have of them climbing on the gate? No, that's not it. I do have it. Where is it? It's there, right.
there it is. Yeah. So yeah, basically, by 10 p.m. there were so many that the police were called and to clear the area in the cemetery. Um, some people had weapons, by the way. Some people had done homemade stakes and goodness knows whatever else. Obviously, most of them were actually fueled by booze and probably being 1970, various other concoctions as well. But yeah, there's an absolute frenzy. So it catches the news and it catches the newspapers. And of course, all this publicity, boom, 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 it grows and grows and grows. So it goes from being a local event story to being a nationwide event story. And that's, this is where it kind of all changes effectively from there on in. So Manchester sort of goes in there that night, full of whatever else. He finds the tomb that he thinks is the tomb, and him and his group tried to open it and they fail to. So basically, Manchester says, he remembers the tomb and he thinks he's going to go back at a later date to sort of try and break in there to stake the vampire, kill the vampire, whatever else. Okay.
Mhm.
So again, what you're getting into this sort of vague realm of Van Helsing sort of thing, him setting himself up as such, and it gets a little bit more crazy as it goes along. To be honest with you, so he goes back again, and he gets lowered in. He finds that there's a hole in the roof of this tomb. Okay, because if you could see from again the photo of the columbarium, the tombs have got sort of proper roofs on them, like this. So he finds that there's a hole in the roof of this tomb, and he manages to get someone to lower him down into the tomb. Okay, of course this is all totally legal. um, and
Oh, man,
basically,
that would give me the heebie-jeebies.
yeah, but basically
Not
he
because of
finds.
a ghost, but because of a body maybe or bones or
Yeah, yeah,
something.
yeah. Well, again,
Real.
there would have been. If you ever go to Highgate, if you go into the where the bodies are, you can still. I mean, because a lot of the coffins are now sort of worn away, so you can actually see the bodies inside even today.
Wow.
So if you go, but you can get in there now by I think only by guided tour. I think
Dude, I'd have
so.
a hazmat suit on.
Mm, it's
Like, you
I
never
mean,
know.
I first went in there in the 80s, and even then it was still
Right.
pretty Wild West. But I'll talk a little bit
So,
about that a
Gary,
bit later
you
on.
got to experience a lot of this stuff before it came super regulated. That's what I love about when I was younger. Things were not as regulated.
Yeah, yeah, because it was still, they didn't really start doing tours there. I don't think until the either late 80s or early 90s. And but you could like literally go in and you could and there'd be there's lots of people who I think kind of took advantage of it being so lackadaisical, even though they had done a lot of work to make sure that probably it was harder for people to get in at night, um, which they were obviously doing at this time. And also the whole thing with the Highgate Vampire again boosted the thing of something being done to protect the cemetery, something being done. I mean, because there's a few famous people buried there as well, so it's kind of open to sort of. I mean, obviously Karl Marx is buried there. Um,
Oh, we just had an anti-communist show to tell. I had a journalist on, so let's not go into Karl Marx. I'm trying to
yeah, yeah,
escape
yeah.
the communist
But
insanity that's going on today.
yeah, I mean, he's yeah, I mean, he's buried there amongst a lot of other people. So I mean, again, it was it's they tried then to protect it because they realised it had become a wild west. Uh,
Yeah.
so anyway, basically he gets in there. He finds that there are 3 evacuated coffins, but no vampire. So he lines the caskets with, of course, blood and crucifixes and scatters holy water. And then he hears this noise at about 2 a.m. His followers, and they all think it's something coming from somewhere, again to do with the vampire. Again, the London Evening News um, say that there's a Satan's riddle of the tomb, and claims that several people were frightened off that night when they were when uh, they tried to get into the cemetery. They were frightened off by various apparitions there. So, and of course, more witnesses then start beginning to contact the newspapers about what they'd seen and whatever else. But again, it's like all these things. The early witnesses, yeah, I can go with that. The more this picks up pace, the more then you get into people just wanting to be part of it, and so saying that they'd seen something at the cemetery. So basically, Farrant would continue to do night vigils there as well, and try and cleanse the cemetery of evil spirits, because fundamentally he still believes that this is a like a satanic organization or black magic organization doing stuff there.
Right.
And the vampire story is just getting now running away from all this. So we're
Right.
looking at a
You
different thing
know, I
altogether.
honestly find that happens, like, even with satanic panic here in the United States. There was this crazy daycare story and everything that got run away in books, but underneath there was this real element with elites and with people who were doing weird stuff. There was a real element, but the media went with this really crazy, stupid stuff. I found
But it,
something similar happens here.
I mean, we had the satanic panic thing here in the UK, and it was there was money down to a program on TV over here called Dispatches that sort of said basically they found some people who claimed that this was going on. They'd been to this and
Mhm.
they'd done this and
Mhm.
that, and then the people who they said they were got persecuted, of course, over here, and
Right.
then about 3 or 4 years later, it all came out as a bunch of bullshit. These people had made this stuff up,
Right. Yep.
and
That's
so
how it goes.
yeah, and that's what was happening a lot of the time with the whole satanic panic thing, and especially here in the UK, it was found to be, a lot of it was found to be absolute nonsense, and it was kind of going back to the old during the times of the witchcraft trials, many years ago. People would point at their neighbours who they didn't like, or they felt was whatever else, and sort of saying, "Oh, she cursed me" and whatever else, and that kind of thing, and then these people would be persecuted, and it kind of got back to that period of time um, with it in the 80s, and obviously I living through that. I
Yeah.
remember it. I remember it very very well. What was happening at the time, and I knew individuals who were involved with it, and individuals who were
Interesting.
kind of again got
Right.
persecuted because of it. So yeah, so yeah, again, all these things build up because of people saying stuff that might not necessarily be true. Um, yeah. So basically, after all this happens again, Manchester decides that he's going to go back to the columbarium, go back to the tomb, and again he's lowered into it, and his discovery, instead of 3 coffins in there, there's only 2. So one of the
Ooh.
coffins is missing. So that basically makes him convinced that it's the vampire's coffin, the vampire or someone, close to the vampire. As I told you, I tend to Bela Lugosi,
Renfield.
yeah, yeah, has removed this. God, he wasn't even thinking. He's basically thinking whoever conjured the vampire up, the black magic people, probably removed the coffin from the vault, and he's convinced it's been uh, moved to a vault nearby, but he's not sure. There's a woman who contacts him called Louisa. There's a brilliant picture of her pointing at photograph, pointing at these various tombs at the time. Um, who he's had previous contact with, who basically says that she knows exactly where this tomb is. And so she takes him to where this tomb is, where the vampire is going to be, and uh, yeah, and basically his group go there, and they force the door of the tomb open. It is not illegal, you know. And when they open it, a foul, wretched smell meets their nostrils. So, I mean,
Well, of course it would.
automatically, yeah, automatically, it's not just the dead, but it's the undead. Don't forget.
Right.
So, the group soon notice that there's an extra coffin in the tomb, one that's not listed because on a lot of the tombs in Highgate, there's a little list on the outside of who's buried
Right.
there.
It's like
So, say it would
inventory.
say there's two people there or whatever else, but there's an extra coffin in this tomb that's
Coughing.
not listed. Okay, so of course, and it bears no nameplate. So of course, this must be the the coffin of the vampire. Obviously,
Right.
when he opens again, this is all Manchester saying this, so we have to believe him. Um, when he opens it, the body inside looks says neither dead nor alive. And already to Manchester, he's about to stake the body, but he's actually stopped by one of his followers who insists that that the only that they're not doing the right thing because they then have to have a discussion. Manchester says it's the only way to kill the vampire. Anyway, they replaced the lid on it and put crucifixes and whatever holy water around it, garlic, without actually staking it because the other people there feel that we're actually doing grave desecration, which they would have been. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so he does an exorcism, etc., etc., and then at but he manages to get in contact with the cemetery, and he at the behest of him, the cemetery brick up the tomb that he believes that the vampire's in. Okay, so he's actually got no other proof apart from that he says that it's a vampire in there, and he gets the cemetery to actually brick up the tomb so that nothing can get in or out. Okay,
Oh,
how ridiculous is that? And the cemetery do it; they brick up the tomb. So
interesting.
mm, this is how much again media begins to play into things. That I mean, this people who are running the cemetery then feel obviously that they got to do something to quash all this, and they feel if they brick up this tomb, then that means that it might finally lay to rest, to use a pun, the vampire story, maybe. But that's why they do it. Um, most thought the job was done, but obviously Manchester isn't convinced.
Oh
And
no.
oh yes,
The
yeah,
job
yeah.
can't be done.
Yes, but after a few weeks, apparently a man is attacked, sustaining neck wounds in the cemetery, and he later dies in hospital. So
For
I've got
real?
some.
Like for
Yeah.
real, he dies?
Oh yeah, allegedly. Again, allegedly. I
Oh,
mean,
so
but
there's
yeah,
no real you don't
no,
have a
no, no.
record
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. There was no news reports, but apparently this guy gets attacked in the cemetery and then dies afterwards. So that's about as far as I know. I mean, again, a lot of the things now we're looking at obviously events that took place 55 years ago. So things are a little bit sketchier than we think they are, now. So looking through this kind of vortex of time. It's
Mhm.
also about this point where the rivalry between like Farrant and Manchester starts sort of beginning to sort of thing because the story's kind of almost dying on its feet a bit, really, and so Manchester feels that he should keep it going and things. So and Farrant basically
That
Farrant's just
sneaky
trying to sort of
Manchester.
Farrant's just basically just trying to ward off any evil heebie-jeebie occultist people that are sort of bugging him, you know, and on found what Manchester actually asks um, Farrant for a jewel, a magical jewel on the on April the 13th, and
That's my birthday.
Yeah, yeah. So he sort of says, we're going to have this magical duel to sort of find out who, whatever else. Basically, Farrant doesn't want to, he doesn't want anything to do with it, and so he doesn't bother turning up. And then Manchester claims that he's the victor because the other guy doesn't turn up. That's about it. So, um, the thing is, now we're getting to this sort of a little bit of a sad point where the story of the vampire kind of falls into the background, and then it's the two protagonists that take over. So you're
Okay.
looking at these two guys who are basically head butting against each other. Um, uh, Farron actually gets arrested because he's doing a magic ritual in an abandoned house near the cemetery.
Was witchcraft still illegal then? Because I
Hmm.
know a lot of people
No, no,
were
no. The
practicing it
Witchcraft
was
Act had
illegal.
been was repealed in
Okay,
the 50s.
okay.
So yeah, we're not a barbarian country anymore, allegedly. um,
Hmm.
but yeah, that got repealed. But still, he'd obviously broken into like an empty house with his followers, was doing some sort
So
of
Farron
banishing.
was an occultist then?
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
a
Basically, he
witchcrafty
was.
kind of
Yeah,
person?
yeah. He was what you'd call what, for want of a better word, a white witch kind of thing. He always claimed that he was a
Okay,
white witch.
okay.
I mean, I know that he had or tried to have connections with Maxine and Alex and Maxine Sanders, who
Right,
were
the
like,
Sanders.
yeah. So and they basically they didn't want anything to do with him, and so yeah. I mean, so involved all that kind of thing. That's how come he was doing the Psychic Investigation Society, etc., etc., etc. So, but yeah, he then gets caught doing this ritual, and again that makes the newspapers, etc. And he doesn't do himself any favors, to be fair. Um,
Right.
he's basically doing this and going to the cemetery and also trying to do rituals. Basically, what he's trying to do is banishing rituals. So he thinks
Okay.
that he's convinced that these things, and actually, I think this is the truth behind it as well. He's convinced that it's people who are practicing black magic and whatever else, and any spiritual entities that people are seeing, the figure with the, because it's this continual thing with the dark figure with the red eyes that people are seeing. He's convinced that basically this is some daemonic entity that has been conjured up by people doing black magic rituals in the cemetery.
So, and then how does it get presented in the media that they find him doing these rituals? Do they present
Um,
him as a black magic kind of
yeah,
person
yeah, yeah,
when
yeah, yeah,
he
yeah. He
feels he's
gets
trying to do something
he
protective?
gets totally vilified in the media because of it. So,
Of course,
mm,
yeah.
because again, the way it gets presented, and kind of Manchester is also doing similar things. I mean, basically, Manchester is actually doing grave desecrations himself, you know,
Mhm.
um, and uh, is getting away with it somehow. So it's a bit. It seems a bit of an odd thing that he's being able to get away with it, and France being used as kind of a bit of a scapegoat because of it. And that's again that fuels a fire of the animosity between the two of them as well. And Manchester also uses Farrant as being sort of an example of why you know he's allowing the vampire to exist. He's allowing this to happen, allowing that to happen, and it just sort of gets into this a little bit of a nasty, crazy story basically between the two. So that the in a weird way the action moves away from the cemetery and the vampire for a while and is about these two guys basically headbutting each other for a bit. And I mean, Manchester actually contacts a guy called Peter Underwood. Now, Peter Underwood started. He's a very respected author in Britain and produced very very many books. But he was also the leader of the Ghost Society, so he'd
Right.
written many books on ghosts and whatever else. And somehow manages to convince Underwood that fact of everything he's said and done is the truth. Everything that Farrant has said and done is rubbish, and Underwood uh, prints a massive section of Manchester's writings in a book called the Vampire Bedside Companion book that comes out. So he's sort of he's obviously very convincing to people. I mean, and
Hmm.
Peter Underwood has been through the spectrum of dealing with ghost hauntings and the cultists and goodness knows what for many years before he comes across Manchester. So, however he manages to convince that, I don't know. I mean, again, so we're getting to that point now where the vampire story explodes here, and then again the what happens culturally begins to pick up on that. And Hammer, as I said before, Hammer picks up on it with Taste of Blood of Dracula. They use it
Hmm.
especially in a film called Dracula AD 1972, where
I remember that one.
yeah, where a guy called Johnny Alucard, that's not Dracula backwards, by the way, um,
No, no, no,
um,
no, no, not at
yeah,
all.
does a satanic ritual with his groovy friends in a cemetery to conjure up Dracula. Again, this is, I mean, the whole thing is because Dracula suddenly moved from Victorian era into the present day. Again, it gives the whole thing of you know young hippie people being involved with black magic and vampirism and all that kind of thing, and that comes really quite directly from what was happening at the time within esoteric stuff, etc. Alex and Maxine Sanders' coven was full of young people, right the way through to obviously what was happening at the happening at the Highgate Vampire investigations, etc.
I've just
David's
popped up David Farrant's website. He's no longer living, but he
no,
still has
no,
a
he's
website
passed away
too.
a few years ago. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and I, he was actually really quite a nice guy and quite a
Hmm.
genuine person. And
Right.
so I'm not one for sort of throwing in about like oh whatever over the other, but he did actually genuinely kind of believe that what he was doing. Um, and I do think at the end of the day, his story is the right story, which is the story of devil worship. There you go.
Yeah,
That's that
that's
picture
it.
there. If you go down, that's
Hmm.
what he found in one of the tombs.
Which is why he was convinced it was, there
Yeah,
was rituals going
yeah,
on,
yeah.
which
Which
I mean,
which is not
totally
really
can
quite
see.
surprising. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And there he is
yeah.
with
And
his cross by that
so
mountain.
what happens now is the fact of that the story begins to die off as it
Hmm.
does because it like all things it loses traction, and then because of things get overtaken, Farrant being prosecuted for doing rituals in the cemetery, rituals in this place, and so he's basically now the police are on. He's being harangued by the police, and he actually doesn't do himself any favors with a lot of these things either. I have to say, when dealing with the police. So mm, Manchester continues to investigate the vampire. Okay, eventually in 1974, he traces the creature to a Gothic style mansion close to the cemetery. Now, some people say this is also the same building that Farrant got arrested in for carrying out a magical ritual. So, this is the kind of thing we're looking at here.
Hmm.
Um, After entry into the deserted building, him and his followers find the same coffin. This is the same coffin that was they bricked up in the other in the tomb in this place. Okay, Manchester has tried to exercise it 4 years ago in the base, but but this time he's out for blood quite literally.
Hmm.
So they drag the coffin out from the house because it's like in the basement kind of thing to discover that the body is still inside. Okay, and this is his description, this is Manchester's description. Apparently, its eyes were red, and traces of blood were found around its mouth. Okay, Manchester then stakes the body in this coffin, and within moments the body dissolves, just like in Dracula films. He then sets fire to the remains of the casket to destroy it totally. So that is effectively, and this again, this by this point this wasn't publicised. That effectively is the end of the Highgate Vampire. He's finally destroyed what he
Destroyed.
believes is a Highgate Vampire. Now, whether this is true or not, we don't know because we only have Manchester's word for it. Okay, um, so we're looking at here. Did it all really happen? All these things, and again, I've glossed over quite a few because there's a lot of information, and I could be here for ages giving you
Hmm,
every
hmm.
single detail of it. So I'm trying to give you
Exactly.
a general overview about what went on. I mean, was it really a vampire? We certainly know grave desecrations that were happening. We know of actual whole bodies being pulled out of tombs and left lying around at the time. So that's we know that was definitely happening at that point.
Right.
But the story of the vampire, I think I'll leave it up to people to make their own minds up. For me personally, I feel that Farrant's story about having black magic, occult people, whatever you want to call them, satanic, Satanists, whatever you want to call them, in the cemetery, doing grave desecrations, doing rituals, as you see from the photo you put up earlier on, is far more believable because
Right.
I think that because we had an absolute boom of interest in the occult, witchcraft, or whatever else in Britain at that time. Um, it was like it was sort of like a blossoming of it, that was happening at that time. That I think that this was part and parcel of all that. Um, I'd like to believe, yes, I'd like to believe there was a vampire. Yes, I'd like to believe that he was a Turkish nobleman from wherever, and um, it's fanciful stuff, and I'd like to be proven wrong. If someone can show me real evidence of
I think I
that's
think
not Sean Manchester's evidence, by the way.
I think
That's
Sean
not-
Manchester might still be alive.
Hmm. Oh,
Actually,
he's still alive. Yeah,
I
he's
can't
definitely still
find
alive.
anything on him, but
No, he's
David
definitely still
has
alive,
passed
and he's
on.
got his own website, and he does post up
I'm trying to
bits and
look for his
pieces still to
website, but
do with it.
I can't. I can't.
I think you might have to look under as Reverend Sean Manchester now.
Oh, he's a Catholic reverend now.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Yeah.
How could I? I'm trying to Sean Mastet. Yeah. Oh, maybe he has it under a blogger.com. Let's see if this is
Mm.
him. Sean Manchester. Nope, that's not him.
Yeah,
Oh,
someone
he's not
just said,
easy.
yeah, he runs a
He's not
church.
easy to
So yeah,
find.
yeah. He.
Yeah, he says, let's see. If you type in Highgate Vampire, probably they call him a public figure.
Oh
And
yeah.
they have him on Ration Wiki. They have his books, but he says Sean Manchester is a British author and self-proclaimed exorcist, best known for his book The Highgate Vampire, which was written subsequent to the vampire sightings in London, England during the 70s.
Yeah.
He claims to be a skilled vampire hunter and to hold the title of Bishop of the Old Catholic Church.
Yeah. And basically, he's also he wrote a couple of books about how he managed to pull various people, mainly young women, obviously, away from the occult, and he prints a story about. There's one thing called is it called From Satan to Christ or something like that? I remember that was around again in the 1980s. It was kind of privately published book, and yeah, there's a few things like that he's sort of been
Well,
involved with. So
if he has a website, it's not easy to find. They're not listing it in the
oh no,
first few
you can
pages,
find it.
so
I mean, I've found information on his website,
okay.
so
Excellent.
again, with all these things, you take large pinches of salt and whatever. But During the 80s, again, there was a slight resurgence of interest. During the early 80s, I know some people who are part of a thing called the Temple of Psychic Youth, which is an offspring from a band called Psychic TV,
Okay.
who were going into Highgate Cemetery to do various things and of the night time, because you could still get in there. This was would have been about 1980 or two, three, something like that, and allegedly again they saw, like, not a vampire but some sort of demonic apparition that was still haunting the part of the cemetery, and they were very much into occulting. One of them was a um, um, or two. Well, one of them became a member of a band called Coil that some people might know. Another guy was a member of a band called, or is a member of a band called Current 93. And so, there were people still getting in there and trying to do stuff. And even, I think even today there's still bits and pieces that go on, but it's not very publicized or whatever else. Or,
Hmm.
I think the security there now is a lot better than it ever was, certainly it ever was
Right,
at the
right.
time when the Highgate Vampire stories were happening. So, um,
That's interesting, and I know, speaking of, like, well, what's interesting, is that I think a lot of people really do believe they have experience or they see something, and I think a lot of times when we're interacting with these cultural phenomenons and these big news stories, we can
mm,
actually project it out like it's not
yeah,
there.
yeah,
We're like
I,
there is some kind of thing, but it's
yeah.
happening in our brains,
I think
in
for
our
the
minds,
earlier
in our
stories,
power.
is it may be an element of truth in it, because this is before you know anyone was coming forward. This is before any publicity.
Before
So
all the
when
crazy, there was
yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
there.
So you've got these, a few people who were saying they witnessed something or they saw something definitely there, and especially the original couple of people that came forward originally, and to Farron, etc., and sort of saying that, well, I had this weird experience there, and this is what I saw. I think those
Mhm.
kind of things are fairly genuine, because there was no precedent for it.
Right. They
You've
weren't
got,
doing it for
yeah, yeah. They weren't
fame.
doing
They
it because
didn't
someone had
hear it.
told them that this was
They
going
didn't
on there
hear
or
it
that
on
was going on there.
ITV.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that, again, what happens here is the fact of, we have, you know, and I do believe that that's a possibility, is we have people over there doing rituals or whatever else. Maybe they might have conjured up something that someone's picked up on as they've gone past, or they've seen, or whatever else. And I do think that's a possibility. Whether it's an apparition, if you want to call it an apparition, whether it's a daemonic entity, if you want to call it that, again, who knows? Whether it's just people in there, doing this stuff or messing around. That's another,
Mhm.
we have to use that option as well. It could be people, having almost like a practical joke in there. But why you'd want to hang around near a cemetery, inside a cemetery near a gate, 11 o'clock at night, just in case someone walks past to spook them, I have no idea. But
Oh,
um,
there's a lot of legend trippers that just love that stuff.
yeah, yeah. And,
I
yeah,
mean, there's a lot of Ted Bundy myths around here, and I've gone and filmed locations where they say he did this or that and researched it and realized, no, he was never there. But I've
yeah,
gone
yeah,
out and
yeah,
filmed it, but I certainly wouldn't break into anything and do anything illegal.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, at the end of the day, people like what Sean Manchester and his group were doing were no better than the other people desecrating the tombs, because they were doing exactly the
Mhm.
same thing. They were desecrating the
Yeah.
tombs. So that there was no difference between the two of them, really, apart from Manchester allegedly was doing it for good. Um,
Our
and so,
a
you
member of
know,
our audience is saying Manchester's church is called the Ecclesia Vetusta Catholica.
I can
He
well
is the
believe it.
old Catholic branch. Ecclesia Vetusta Catholica, if you want to check him out and Google
Yeah.
that. Interesting. So when you've done these lectures or when you're researching this, have you ever had anyone come up to you and say, "Hey, Gary, I know you think this isn't real, but I had an experience there.
I'll be honest with you. Um, uh, yes, I have. The weirdest thing is because when I did the talk, um, someone came up to me afterwards and sort of said, "Oh, I know so and so, I know so and so, and I know this and this that and the other." But I also know a couple of people who tell me, and I'm not going to mention who they are,
No worries.
that they've had an experience over Highgate Cemetery late at night. And again, it was to do with an entity moving around late at night over there. So, and again, to me, they're fairly trustworthy. I mean, well, not fairly. They are trustworthy people. They're people I know very well, and so I kind of want to believe what they're saying.
Hmm.
That they've gone over there, obviously, probably to do, like most of us do, that kind of thing, just to do this, spook house trip, or
Hmm.
whatever you want to call it, late at night, and yeah, and they said they had an experience over there, which okay, I'll buy that, you know.
Doesn't mean there's a
Uh,
vampire there.
no, but yeah, I'd certainly again, I think that the vampire thing is maybe more of a myth, or maybe
Yeah,
it doesn't, something about it doesn't ring quite true to me, whereas the other stuff does,
right. That
because
people were
we
doing.
got yeah,
Well,
yeah,
you
because
guys have an like not in England, but in Edinburgh, they have a really infamous cemetery that's supposed to have like some. It was the area I think was used during to house. It's like a con. It was used like a concentration camp to house different religions back in the 1600. I can't remember. I
mm,
don't have it right in front of me, but it's in Edinburgh, and there's all sorts of creepy myths about the grave of Mackenzie something or something other. And I remember watching shows on it, and you get all these people who same thing. They go in there for a legend tripping thing, and they go to this tomb, and they feel like something chases them through the cemetery, or they go through tours, and people are getting
mm.
sick and all this stuff. So
Is that
there.
you want about the catacombs though? There's
Oh,
the
it wasn't the catacombs. It was an actual. I'll look it up. I'll
There's
tell
a
you.
thing that's below the streets. I think it is in Edinburgh, if I remember,
Yeah, Edinburgh
where
has the
people were living
underground.
for a while, almost like below
Yeah.
ground,
Yeah, they
and
have that underground. It's
yeah,
spooky.
and people had died there, and there was lots of again ghost stories and goodness knows whatever else that
Mhm.
go on about that place. So yeah, I mean, I got no problem with
The
the idea of.
It's called the Mackenzie Poltergeist in Edinburgh. It's in Greyfriars Cemetery.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. Yeah, yeah. Where the
Yeah,
Greyfriars
I,
body
I
is.
I
Yeah,
knew
yeah,
you would have to know. I'm like, it's
yeah,
really,
yeah.
it's not, it's no, well known. Yeah, I'm like,
So,
oh, I ain't going to that cemetery.
but again, I mean, it's one of those things that um, uh, yeah. I think that maybe there's something there. I mean, when you're surrounded by potentially the bodies of that that many people, maybe there is some residual of something there. I mean, obviously, there used to be a thing that in the old days where people believed that cemeteries weren't haunted because
Hmm.
people didn't die in cemeteries.
Right.
Okay, or that cemeteries would have one ghost because there was a tradition, allegedly tradition, where they would actually, when they built a new cemetery, that they would kill somebody to have them buried there, so that that spirit would haunt the cemetery and protect the cemetery. Again, that's a very another English, British tradition rather.
Interesting.
Um, so again,
Well,
whether this is
with
true or not is
with
another
that
thing altogether.
Greyfriars graveyard, like I said, it's the Mackenzie Mausoleum, but I think it has a history of holding people prisoner in that area for
Mm.
some kind of religious crazy persecution or
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah,
like that. I think it was in the time of King Charles II or something like that. I can't remember the history, but if anywhere is going to be haunted, it would be some place where something horrible
yeah,
happened
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
You know what I
I
mean?
mean, do I think Highgate Cemetery is potentially haunted? Possibly. You know,
Yeah.
I think there's probably been enough stuff done there that if you
Mhm.
believe in um, black magic, the occult, Satanism, whatever you want to call it, if you believe in that kind of thing, I think there's been enough people over there doing some damn foolish things at some points and not really realizing what they've done and probably, or maybe realizing what they're doing, and then there's something there. I think
Right.
there's enough energy there, and to want to to feel that there's that possibility. So, yes, do I believe that the people I know saw something there? I think it's a very good possibility, but I don't think it's the Highgate Vampire. Well, number one,
Yeah.
Sean
That's a
Manchester. Sean
fantasy.
Manchester had killed it, so and got rid of it. So
Oh,
it,
it's
it,
gone.
it cannot
He
be that
made
then.
sure to cap it off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's
Right.
done that. He
Well,
put the lid on that. But
speaking of grades, I actually wanna do a show on Jim Morrison one time. I'm not saying that you have to come, but you've been to Jim Morrison's grave, and it's very famous.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I was a big fan of the Doors, and I had to. I went there. First time I went
A
there
lot of
was
conspiracy around Jim Morrison in America.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I know all about that. Yeah,
I won't
I
get
mean,
into it.
the weirdest thing was, I mean, with Jim Morrison was, I discovered him when I was about 14 years old, and
Mhm.
at that point, most of the Doors records were not available in the UK.
Oh, really?
So yeah, because they'd gone out of print here because no one remembered who the Doors were. You could probably pick up a 7-inch single still of Light My Fire or something, but the albums are kind of were out of print, and I had to order the albums from. I mean, I was at
America?
school and I was saving up my money, whatever money I was given. I had to order the albums from the States, like
Right.
two or three albums from America because they were no longer available in the UK. I ordered Morrison's Book of Poetry from the States at that time as well because you couldn't get it over here.
Wow.
And of course, in the 90s,
Like,
that all
6
changed
months
when
later, you get it.
yeah, yeah, no, when Oliver Stone's movie came out, when was that,
Right.
91 or
Right.
wherever it was, that all changed. Suddenly
Yeah.
everyone knew the Doors, who the Doors were, sort of thing.
But
But
you
yeah,
were
but
an
for
early adapter
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was one of those
before
things.
that film anyways.
I discovered it, and I got a copy of No One Here Gets Out Alive, the Danny Sugarman biography, and read that. And so that's one of the reasons why the photo of me at Jim's grave, which is done about that must be about 1986 or 87, when they still had
Right.
the big bust there of him that
Right.
someone stole, I think it was. So. Um,
Desecration.
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, there was loads. I mean, at that time, the grave, around about the grave, was just full of graffiti. The
Right.
way you found your way to where Morrison was is because various other graves had Jim this way and an arrow pointing to it. So you knew to go because it's actually in the middle of quite a bit of with quite a few other graves surround it, and
Right.
there's lots of there's these arrows sort of like on, graffitied on other graves saying Jim this way. There was and
Oh,
like an
that's
arrow this way,
terrible.
and so yeah, I mean that's the way. I've not been to see Morrison's grave now in many years, but I can imagine that it probably is not quite as bad. But literally, if
No,
you look at that,
it's there
if you look
there
at
is a channel on YouTube called Grim Collective, and they travel all around the world to all these
yeah,
crazy, cool Gothic places, and they went there, and it's pretty good.
mm. And Père Lachaise is a massive cemetery anyway. Loads of famous people are buried there. But
Mm.
there's if you look at that photo of me, you can see all behind the graffiti on the wall, on all the tombs around it, and actually on the grave itself. On at that point, I think the headstone just said Jim Morrison, but I think now they got one that says James Douglas Morrison instead in the
Okay.
States. But like that time, it just Jim Morrison. Then it had the bust of him on top of it, and it was just covered in graffiti.
So are you
So
still doing this lecturing or on this topic, or are you planning another topic? Like, do you have something else that you're working on?
the next lecture I'm doing is in March, and that's in London, and I'm doing it about Kenneth Anger, who um, I'm been fanatical about since since I was about
Right. We
16,
you were oh,
17.
that's the last show we were
And
talking about Hollywood
yeah,
Babylon.
Yeah, and I'm concentrating on one of his films. I met Anger 3 or 4 times, and but I'm doing about the actually it's not really about Lucifer Rising, but it's about the film that started out being Lucifer Rising before it all fell to pieces,
Okay.
and this
So his
includes
early attempts.
yeah, this includes film of things to do with the Rolling Stones. Marianne Faithfull,
Who
oddly enough,
just
who
passed away.
just passed away
Yeah.
recently. The whole thing, Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan, that whole kit and caboodle about
Crazy
what was happening in
in that period of time.
yeah in America at that time, and it's honestly, you could not make it up. It's so damn The story is just incredible, and it's all. And I've looked into it, and it's all factually based. So it's not sort of myth building. All these things actually happened, and it was just. I mean, the fact of one of the guy who he chooses to play one of the cast members ends up going to join the Manson family, and then ends up getting
Right.
uh, gets arrested for the murder of Gary Heineman or Hinman,
Wow.
however you want to say it.
Things
Uh,
were crazy, and a lot of that stuff, by the way, I've done a lot of research, and Manson was kind of tied into the FBI.
yeah, yeah. There's
For
a new
like it's
thing
crazy
called
time.
there was a book called Chaos or
Oh
something
yeah,
came out a
check
couple of years
that
ago.
book out. It's
Yeah,
a
and
good
actually, I
book.
think there's a documentary on it, and it's going to air on Netflix or something in about another week.
Oh. Well, there you
So
go.
I
You
think a
can
2 or 3
cover
part
that.
documentary to do with that. So, but yeah,
Excellent.
I
Well,
mean,
Gary,
yeah, that's
go
my
ahead.
next thing. So
That's your next thing.
but
I mean,
yeah,
it's late there. You're tired. I know you've had a
yeah,
long day.
yeah.
Work, work, work. There's our stuff that we like to do, and then we have the reality of work. So I'm gonna let you go so you can get to sleep to take on the next day. And I really
Yeah.
appreciate you
Well,
coming on the show.
I hope that everything was kind of clear, and I hope I covered as much as
No,
possible with it
you
because,
did
as
a
I
great
said,
job.
it's such a big, big, big story, and I was kind of touching around the edges of it. If you want to
Hmm.
go and delve in deeper with it, there's a lot. I mean, and there's quite a lot online about it as well. But go and investigate yourself. Make up your own mind. I mean,
Right,
you might believe that the Manchester story of the vampire. You might believe the Farrant story of the occultist, but go out there. It's a
right. So,
fascinating, deep
vampire or
dive.
occultist?
Yeah,
Vampire or
it's a
occultist?
fascinating deep dive. To be fair with you, and
All
again,
right.
when I do the talk, I go into a lot more detail about all these things. But being
Perfect.
here, we've had to sort of uh, slightly
Exactly.
cover some bits and not go as deep into other bits.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to
So
put you out. Scary, you don't have to hang around. I'm going to tie up the show, but I thank you so
okay,
much for coming on.
cheers. Thank you for having me.
Cheers. Bye. All right, guys, that was fantastic. So I know a lot of you could be listening. You could be like, oh my God, that's so satanic or whatever. I like to cover these parts of histories and remind people about the culture that was there because culture forms everything. Even above laws, all that stuff, culture influences people. So, hey, if you want a different culture, this is what I'm telling you. This is the stuff. And there's a lot of Marxism going on today in America and you got to look at what they're printing and showing the youth. This is what you got to compete with. Look, oldie fuddy duddies like me, we've got to compete with this stuff. If we don't want people being Marxist, we don't want this. You got to realize, I mean, you got to be a good designer and you have to have something that grabs the youth. You can't just go, well, you're bad for looking at occultism because they're not going to listen to that. I wouldn't have listened to that when I was young. I would have poo pooed my parents too. So I think this is fascinating part of history to look at it, analyzing it. I'm not encouraging anyone to be a vampire or an occultist. We just want to go in there and analyze this, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Uh, I'm going to do a show next Tuesday. We're going to be live streaming documentary on Jim Jones and MK Ultra. If you want to join me the rest of the week, no shows. I have too much stuff. I have to get caught up in real life. Also, tomorrow I'm going to be a guest on oh, my brain's blinking at the podcast. I'm going to put the link up on my X. So just hold on a moment. You guys can go to at Gen X News on X. That's my X stuff where everybody is. I'm going to be a guest. I'm talking about Jim Jones and MK Ultra tomorrow on Ryder Lee's podcast. His name's Ryder Lee. You can Google him. I'll post the links when I get them. So join me tomorrow, 10 p.m. Eastern, on that. And I will see you guys next week. I'm going to be out of here, and I hope you enjoyed The Vampire, Highgate Vampire, a little history back to the 60s and 70s. I enjoyed it. It was great. Thank you so much.